The moment I set the last cardboard box on my new kitchen counter in Naperville, Illinois, my phone vibrated with a text that told me exactly how the rest of my day was going to go. It was my daughter, Lauren. She and her husband, Greg, were running 2 hours late to help me move, which meant they were perfectly on time to do zero heavy lifting and offer plenty of unsolicited opinions. At 66, I had just traded a rambling, drafty 4-bedroom suburban house in Schaumburg for a crisp, manageable 2-bedroom condo right here in the heart of Naperville. My husband had passed away 3 years ago, and I was simply tired of cleaning empty rooms and paying exorbitant ComEd utility bills to heat spaces I never used. The new place was bright, featured a small balcony overlooking a quiet neighborhood park, and most importantly, was entirely mine. A sharp knock broke the quiet. Before I could reach the handle, Lauren pushed the door open, holding an iced Starbucks coffee and looking around with a tightly pulled expression. Greg trailed behind her, carrying a single, incredibly light box of decorative pillows. "Wow, Mom," Lauren sighed, stepping out of her designer slides. Her eyes swept over the modest living area, calculating the square footage and clearly finding it lacking. "It's really small. Are you sure all your furniture is going to fit? You didn't even keep the good dining table." I wiped my dusty hands on a dish towel. "The good dining table seats 12, Lauren." "I am one person." "Still," she murmured, tracing a manicured finger over the quartz countertop. "It just feels like a huge step down." "I mean, if money was getting this tight, you should have just told us. Greg and I could have helped you figure out a budget." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but simply offered a polite, unyielding smile. I wasn't broke, I was practical. But Lauren had always equated physical space with personal success, measuring her self-worth by zip codes and square footage. "I'm perfectly fine with my budget," I replied smoothly. "Well, at least it's close to our house," Lauren chimed in, suddenly brightening. "Since you have all this free time now, you'll be a lifesaver for babysitting." She didn't ask, she just assumed. And as she directed Greg to drop the box in the hallway, I knew my quiet retirement was already under threat. Greg dusted his hands off, looking around the living room. "So, where do you want these other boxes, Evelyn? Lauren said you had plenty of room in the second bedroom." I frowned slightly. "What other boxes?" Lauren waved her hand dismissively. "Just a few things we needed out of our garage. Greg's golf clubs, some out-of-season winter coats, holiday decorations. Since you downsized, you don't need the guest room for anything important, right? It makes perfect sense to store them here. Plus, it'll be convenient when I drop Leo off during the week." She reached into her expensive Tory Burch handbag and pulled out a brass keychain. "Anyway, I need a spare key." She continued, holding her hand out expectantly. "Just in case of emergencies, or if I need to grab Greg's clubs while you're out running errands at Mariano's." I looked at her outstretched hand. In the past, I would have handed the key over just to keep the fragile family peace. I would have let my extra bedroom become their personal overflow unit. But looking at the sunlight streaming through my new double-paned windows, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I hadn't packed up 30 years of memories just to become a free storage facility for 2 adults who couldn't manage their own lives. I picked up my purse, retrieved my single spare key, and placed it deliberately inside a small ceramic decorative bowl on the kitchen island. "I won't be giving out a spare key, Lauren," I stated, keeping my tone entirely conversational. Lauren's hand dropped, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Excuse me, what if something happens to you? What if there's a medical emergency?" "If there is a medical emergency, the building superintendent has a master key," I answered calmly. "As for the boxes, you can leave them in the hallway for now. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to take them back to your house in Wheaton. I'm turning the second bedroom into a painting studio." Greg shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Lauren's face flushed a deep, indignant red. "A painting studio, Mom? That's ridiculous, you barely paint." She scoffed, clearly offended by the sudden boundary. "I have plenty of time to learn now," I smiled gently. I walked over to the front door and pulled it open. "Thank you both for bringing the pillows." I'll see you tomorrow at 6 to pick up your things. Tomorrow evening came and went. The 5 heavy boxes of Greg's golf gear, college memorabilia, and Lauren's excess holiday decorations remained stacked like a barricade in my narrow hallway. Lauren ignored my text message, and Greg sent a vague, pathetic excuse about working late at his office in downtown Chicago. They were playing a familiar game of chicken, assuming I would eventually just drag the boxes into my spare room and accept defeat. They severely underestimated my new commitment to a clutter-free life. On Thursday morning, I finished my coffee, opened my laptop, and found a clean, climate-controlled storage facility just 2 miles from Lauren's large suburban home, right off Roosevelt Road. I rented a 5x5 unit online, then I called a local Naperville moving service. For $150, 2 strong young men arrived at my condo, loaded the 5 boxes and the golf bag, and drove them directly to the storage facility. I paid for exactly 1 month of rent up front in cash. Returning to my pristine condo, I felt lighter than I had in years. The hallway was clear. My spare room was ready for the easel and canvases I had purchased the day before at the local craft store. I took a photo of the storage unit key and the entry code, attaching them to a brief text message addressed to a group chat with Lauren and Greg. I found a great solution for your extra things. They are safe at the Secure Store on Maple Avenue, Unit 42. Rent is paid through the 30th of this month. Key will be mailed to your house today. Love, Mom. My phone rang less than 3 minutes later. Lauren's name flashed across the screen. I silenced the ringer, flipped the phone face down on the counter, and walked into my new studio to unwrap my paintbrushes. An hour later, a text finally came through. I can't believe you did that. We don't have time to go to a storage unit. That is incredibly selfish, Mom. I didn't type out a long, emotional defense. I didn't apologize or explain my desperate need for physical and mental space. I simply tapped a thumbs-up emoji and placed the phone back in my pocket. The boxes were gone, and the boundary was locked in place. The real test, however, was going to be my grandson. Tuesday morning arrived with a crisp autumn breeze and a clear agenda. I had a watercolor class at the Naperville Municipal Center at 10, followed by a leisurely lunch with an old friend at a cafe along the Riverwalk. At 8:30 a.m., a loud, urgent knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find Lauren standing there in premium Alo yoga workout gear, holding the hand of my 5-year-old grandson, Leo. Leo looked sleepy, clutching a worn-out stuffed dinosaur. "Hey, Mom," Lauren rushed out, not meeting my eyes. She practically nudged Leo inside. I had a total scheduling disaster. My Pilates instructor changed the time, and then I have a brunch meeting with the Lincoln Elementary PTA committee. "I need you to watch Leo until 3. She began backing away toward the hallway elevator before I even had a chance to speak. "Lauren," I called out, my voice sharp enough to halt her retreat. "I have a class this morning. I cannot watch Leo today." She let out an exaggerated sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "Mom, come on, it's just a painting class. You can go next week." This PTA brunch is crucial for Leo's school placement next year. I'm already running late, and you're just sitting here. I looked down at Leo, who was staring up at me with big, innocent brown eyes. My heart softened for the boy, but it hardened against my daughter's blatant disrespect. She was using her child as a pawn to force my compliance. I knelt down, giving Leo a warm hug. Then I stood back up and looked directly at Lauren. "I'll watch him today," I stated firmly. Lauren let out a triumphant little breath, a smug smile touching her lips. "Thanks, Mom." "I knew you'd understand. See you at 3. "Listen to me carefully, Lauren," I interrupted, stepping out into the hallway so she couldn't easily slip into the elevator. "I will keep him today because he is already here and I love him. But this is the absolute last time you will drop him off without 24 hours notice and my explicit agreement. If you do this again, I will not open the door." She rolled her eyes, clearly dismissing my warning as empty grandmotherly bluster. "Sure, Mom, whatever you say. Have fun with the paints later." She disappeared behind the closing elevator doors. I walked back inside, made Leo a bowl of organic oatmeal, and quietly canceled my class. I wasn't upset, I was simply making a mental adjustment. Next time, there would be no discussion. 2 weeks later, the exact scenario played out again. It was a Thursday. Lauren had sent a text at 7:00 a.m., dropping Leo off at 8. Emergency hair appointment. My colorist is leaving town for Miami. Thanks, I read the message while sipping my coffee. I did not reply. Instead, I finished my breakfast, washed the dishes, and put on my walking shoes and a light jacket. At 7:55 a.m., I stepped out of my condo, locked the door securely, and walked down the hall to the stairwell. I didn't leave the building. I simply went down to the first-floor lobby and sat in a comfortable velvet armchair near the indoor water fountain with a good paperback novel. At exactly 8:05 a.m., my phone began to buzz in my pocket. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then came the barrage of texts. Mom, where are you? I'm at your door. /Mom, open up. I know you're in there. Your car is in the underground garage. This isn't funny. I'm going to be late for my appointment. I turned a page in my book. I had explicitly warned her. I felt a tiny twinge of guilt regarding Leo, but I knew he was perfectly safe with his mother in a climate-controlled hallway. After 20 minutes, Lauren marched out of the elevator into the lobby, dragging a confused-looking Leo by the hand. Her face was flushed with absolute fury. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me sitting peacefully near the fountain. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, marching over, drawing a sharp look from the front desk concierge. "I've been banging on your door for 20 minutes. I calmly placed a ribbon bookmark on my page and looked up. "I told you, Lauren, no unscheduled drop-offs. I had plans this morning." "Plans?" "You're sitting in the lobby reading a paperback," she almost shouted. "My plan was to enjoy a quiet morning reading," I answered smoothly, standing up and offering Leo a quick, affectionate wave. "A lack of an emergency on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Enjoy your hair appointment. Or I suppose, enjoy rescheduling it." Lauren's jaw dropped. She glared at me with absolute venom. "You're going to regret this attitude, Mom. Greg's parents are hosting a huge family dinner at our house in Wheaton this Sunday. Don't expect a warm welcome if you're going to act like a selfish teenager." She turned on her heel, yanked Leo's arm, and stormed out the glass lobby doors into the crisp morning air. I sat back down. The book was just getting good. Sunday evening arrived with a heavy, driving downpour. I parked my reliable sedan at the edge of Lauren and Greg's massive circular driveway in Wheaton, slipping past 3 leased luxury SUVs, a BMW, a Mercedes, and a Range Rover. Their home was a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial in a gated subdivision, purchased years ago entirely to project an image of wealth and high social standing that they could not actually sustain. Inside, the house smelled of expensive catering and suffocating tension. Greg's parents, Richard and Elinor, sat on the plush white leather sofas, nursing glasses of imported Kendall Jackson wine. Elinor was a woman who wore her perceived social superiority, like a heavy, choking perfume. She had always viewed my late husband and me as quaint, middle-class background characters in her son's grand life. "Evelyn," Elinor greeted me coldly, barely lifting her chin as I entered the living room. "Lauren tells us you've moved into a tiny little complex downtown. How brave of you to give up a real home at your age." I handed Greg my wet umbrella and took a seat in an armchair by the corner. "It's exactly what I need, Elinor. Minimal maintenance and total peace." Lauren hurried out of the kitchen carrying a wooden tray of imported artisan cheeses. She shot me a cold, lingering look, still furious about Thursday morning in the lobby. She placed the tray down and immediately joined Elinor on the sofa, clearly seeking backup for a verbal ambush. "I just worry about her," Lauren sighed loudly, addressing Elinor but making sure her voice carried across the room. "She has this tiny space. No yard, nowhere to really host family for the holidays. It feels like she's just giving up on being part of our lives." We offered to let her help out with Leo more to keep her active, but she's decided to focus entirely on herself. Elinor let out a soft, pitying click of her tongue. Well, downsizing is often the only option for people who didn't plan their retirements properly. It's a shame, really, but not everyone has the financial acumen to maintain a large estate through their golden years. Greg stood awkwardly by the gas fireplace, swirling his drink and avoiding eye contact with everyone. He knew the truth, but he was far too terrified of his mother and his wife to ever speak up. I didn't flush. I didn't defend my retirement savings or explain that my condo was located in one of the most desirable walkable districts in DuPage County. I simply selected a piece of sharp white cheddar from the board and took a deliberate bite. Then Lauren leaned forward, unable to resist the urge to drive the knife a little deeper in front of her wealthy in-laws. She looked right at me, a patronizing smirk spreading across her perfectly manicured face. "It's fine, Evelyn," Lauren said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "A two-bedroom place is all she can manage right now. I mean, let's be honest, not everyone can afford a real house." Silence settled heavily over the room. Evelyn nodded in solemn agreement, taking a slow sip of her wine. Greg suddenly found his shoes to be the most fascinating objects in the universe. The air was thick with their shared assumption that I was the poor, struggling widow who had to be pitied and tolerated. I chewed my cheese, swallowed slowly, and reached into my leather handbag. "Affordability is such an interesting concept, Lauren," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of anger or defensiveness. I pulled out a crisp white business envelope and placed it calmly on the glass coffee table right next to the artisan cheese board. I didn't slam it down, I just tapped the surface twice with my index finger. "I brought a few things to clarify my financial situation, since it seems to be a topic of such deep concern for everyone tonight." I smiled warmly at Evelyn. I slid the first document out of the envelope. It was the official Kane/DuPage County Recorder's deed to my condo. I pushed it gently across the table toward Lauren. "That is the deed to my two-bedroom place," I explained calmly. "You'll notice the official county stamp at the bottom, paid in full, cash, no mortgage, no bank interest rate. I own every single square inch of it, lock, stock, and barrel." Lauren's smirk faltered slightly, her eyes scanning the official gold seal. Evelyn frowned, adjusting her designer reading glasses. I reached into the envelope again and withdrew a second, more colorful piece of paper. It was a printed bank statement showing a recently canceled automatic wire transfer. I slid it across the glass table, directly toward Greg. "And this," I continued, my tone remaining steady and pleasant, "is the confirmation from Chase Bank that I have officially canceled the $1,500 monthly transfer I've been sending into your joint account for the last 3 years to cover the shortfall on your property taxes and Lauren's luxury car lease." Greg's face instantly drained of all color. He looked as though he had been struck by lightning. Lauren snatched the paper from the table, her eyes darting frantically over the numbers. Her smirk didn't just fade, it evaporated completely, replaced by absolute, unadulterated panic. "Mom," she whispered, the color rushing completely out of her cheeks. Evelyn stared at the bank statement, her wealthy matriarch persona shattering in a single instant. "You've been paying their property taxes," Evelyn snapped, turning sharply on her son. "Gregory, you told us this estate was easily covered by your corporate salary." Greg remained frozen, staring miserably at his wingtip shoes. Lauren frantically scrambled to fold the paper. "Evelyn, it was just temporary. Mom offered to help." "I didn't offer," I corrected her mildly, keeping my posture completely relaxed. "Greg asked me in tears 3 years ago to stop you from defaulting on this real house. I kept quiet to preserve your family's pride, but since we are evaluating financial competence tonight, I thought full transparency was best." The grand 5-bedroom colonial suddenly felt like a collapsing house of cards. "Mom, please," Lauren pleaded, her voice cracking as real terror set in. "The annual property tax bill is due in 3 weeks. We'll be completely underwater without that transfer." I picked up my water glass, took a slow, refreshing sip, and stood up from the armchair. "A 2-bedroom place without debt is true wealth, Lauren. A 5-bedroom house built on secret handouts is just a trap. You are 35 years old. It's time you learned the difference." I picked up my wet raincoat from the back of the chair. The party was over, and I was ready to go home to my quiet, peaceful condo. By Monday morning, my phone was a battlefield of missed calls and frantic notifications. Lauren had called 12 times. Greg left 3 desperate voicemails begging me to reinstate the transfer, promising they would sell Lauren's luxury car to make things right. I ignored all of them. I spent my morning in my sunny spare bedroom, painting a watercolor of the park across the street. The quiet in my condo wasn't lonely. It was the peaceful silence of a woman who had finally reclaimed her life. On Wednesday afternoon, the lobby intercom buzzed. It was Greg standing downstairs in the lobby alone, looking defeated. When I opened my front door, he looked utterly exhausted, holding a cheap grocery store bouquet of carnations. "Evelyn," he said, his voice cracking, "I am so incredibly sorry. For my mother, for Lauren, for taking your money and letting them treat you like that. I didn't invite him inside the apartment." "Apologies are a good start, Greg, but the financial support is permanently finished." He nodded miserably, looking at the floorboards. "I know. We listed the house this morning with a real estate agent. We can't afford it. Lauren is terrified, but she wants you to see Leo this weekend. You can bring Leo on Saturday at noon," I told him evenly. "You, not Lauren. She needs a timeout to process her new reality." Greg nodded quickly, desperate for any shred of connection. The following months brought a permanent, healthy shift to our family dynamics. Lauren and Greg sold their sprawling colonial at a loss and moved into a modest, manageable townhouse in Naperville, just a few minutes away from my building. The least luxury SUVs were quietly replaced by practical, paid-for used sedans. Lauren was icy toward me for a long time, but the condescension had vanished completely. She learned the hard way that the power in our relationship didn't belong to the one with the biggest house. It belonged to the one holding the keys to her own stability. She never asked for money again, and she never dropped Leo off without a confirmed, respectful invitation. I didn't hold a grudge, but I also didn't rush to fix their bruised egos. I spent my days exactly as I pleased, mastering my watercolors, walking the Naperville Riverwalk, and hosting genuine friends in my perfectly sized living room. On a bright Saturday afternoon, I sat out on my balcony with Leo, showing him how to mix blue and yellow paint to make vibrant greens. He laughed, happily smudging a streak of paint across his chin. I looked around my small, fully owned space. There were no empty rooms gathering dust, and no heavy, toxic expectations weighing on my shoulders. Lauren had been right about one thing all along. Not everyone could afford this kind of peace, but I had earned every single inch of mine. If you enjoyed Evelyn's journey of reclaiming her peace and setting boundaries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.